Picture a winter night in the middle of January, deep in the countryside of medieval Europe.
Outside the small cottage, the wind rushes through the gaps of wooden shutters, scraping along the low wall and bob walls as though it were a living creature clawing at the home.
The sky is heavy, starless, a curtain of black pressing down upon the thatched roof. Within the single-room house, the earth floor is hard and cold, and the air itself hangs frozen. Every breath forms a faint, white mist before dissolving into the dark. At the center of the room sits the hearth, once the heart of the household. Tonight, it has gone silent. The flames that should be dancing warmly have long since collapsed into a dull, grey bed of ashes. The remaining embers glow so faintly they resemble the last pulse of life in a dying body. The scent of cooled charcoal lingers, acrid and hollow, and the silence around the empty hearth feels heavier than the night outside. A woman kneels before it. She is the keeper of this home now. Her husband had been taken the previous harvest season by illness, leaving her with the task of feeding herself and her grandson through the long winter. A woolen gown, patched and mended at the shoulders, hangs loosely over her thin frame.
The sleeves are worn smooth at the elbows, and her cracked hands, raw from endless work in the cold, tremble as she brushes back a strand of hair that has escaped her headscarf.
The chill bites at her fingertips, and the hollowness of the room seems to echo her own weariness. In the corner, on a pile of straw spread with the thinnest of blankets, lies a boy no older than 6. His small body is curled tightly, knees pressed to chest, his breath shallow. When the wind slips through the cracks of the shutter, the blanket quivers and his pale feet are briefly exposed to the air. He whimpers softly, half in sleep, half in hunger, his face flushed with cold. The sound pierces the woman like a blade. She cannot let the night stretch on in silence and frost. She must bring back the fire. Leaning closer to the hearth, she takes the long iron poker and gently stirs the ashes. For a moment, she thinks she sees a faint ember flicker red. Hope stirs within her chest, small but stubborn.
She gathers a handful of dry straw from a basket near the wall, places it carefully over the spot, and bends low, her breath moving in slow whispers toward the faint glow.
A curl of smoke rises, then vanishes as quickly as it appeared. The gust from outside sneaks through the doorway's edges and snuffs out the last sign of life in the hearth. The ember dies. The ash falls silent. She draws back, staring at the grey dust that remains. A lump forms in her throat, heavy with the memory of summers when the woodpile was high and strong, when the kitchen always smelled of warm bread and stew. Now, in the harshest month of the year, the basket in the corner contains only a few crooked sticks of wood, brittle and precious. Each piece must be guarded as though it were treasure. If she uses too much tonight, what will remain for the endless nights to come? January is cruel, and February waits with sharper teeth. From outside comes the distant howl of a dog. It echoes across the frozen fields, eerie and long, before fading into the wind's constant sigh. The sound seems to say, "Winter does not spare you." The woman closes her eyes and steadies her breath. She cannot afford despair. Somewhere in her heart is the stubborn resolve of all women who have faced these hungry months. She rises to her feet, her joints stiff and aching, and turns to the corner where the last sticks of wood rest. Her hand hovers above the pile. Each branch feels like a decision, each splinter a bargain with tomorrow. She chooses the thinnest piece, dry and light, one that might catch quickly without burning too long. In her other hand, she gathers another clutch of straw. She kneels again, her movements deliberate, as though performing a sacred rite. This time, she arranges the straw carefully into a small nest, sets the branch upon it, and leans close once more. Her lips purse and she breathes gently, whispering as if speaking to a sleeping child. The air trembles, the straw shivers, and at last a faint orange spark flickers, weak but real. It catches at a single edge of straw, then another. Smoke curls upward, filling her eyes, and a tear slips down her cheek, not from the sting, but from relief. The boy stirs on his bed of straw. His eyes blink open, wide and glassy, catching the faint new glow. He does not speak, only watches as the orange light grows. The woman coaxes the flame, adding a splinter at a time, until the fire gathers strength. Soon, the first crackle is heard, small but unmistakable, a promise that warmth has returned. The hearth, once silent, now sighs with life. The glow spreads across the small room, painting the walls with gentle amber light. Shadows leap and stretch, no longer frightening but familiar, like companions. The chill still clings to the stones of the floor, but above it, the air begins to soften. The woman places her hands before the flames, feeling the numbness ease from her skin.
Behind her, the boy stretches out his feet toward the fire, and for the first time that evening, his breathing slows into comfort.
There is no feast tonight, no loaf of fresh bread, no bubbling pot of stew. Yet the fire alone is a kind of meal, feeding them with hope. The woman leans back on her heels and allows herself the smallest smile. She whispers a prayer of thanks not to fortune or wealth, but to the simple miracle of flame returning to ash. The night is still long, and hunger still waits, but warmth has come back to their side. And so, in the bleakest of months, within the silence of a cottage beaten by winter, a woman and her grandson sit beside a fire no larger than a candle's flame. It is enough to keep fear away. It is enough to begin again tomorrow. When the fire is finally coaxed back to life, the woman sits quietly, watching the thin flames climb and stretch toward the low chimney. The relief is temporary. Warmth alone cannot fill the belly. In the silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning twigs, another problem presses forward in her mind, the butter crock. Every medieval household, even the poorest, relied upon that small, clay jar where butter was kept cool and safe.
It was the pantry's beating heart, holding the fat that transformed rough bread into something nourishing, that gave porridge its strength, that soothed a tired child at the end of the day.
Without it, meals grew thin, weaker, and harder to face. Tonight, she fears, the jar is empty. She rises slowly, joints stiff, and crosses the room. Her bare feet touch the cold earth floor with every step, the chill climbing into her bones. Against the far wall sits a wooden shelf, roughly hewn, warped with years. Upon it rests a single pot, earthenware, lipped, covered with a scrap of linen tied down with twine. She places her hands on it, as though approaching a sacred object. For a moment, she hesitates. Part of her wishes not to know, to pretend that inside lies at least a small golden pat of butter waiting. But the weight of responsibility does not allow such illusions. She untees the cord with trembling fingers. The linen, once clean, now shows smears of yellow oil at its edges, the ghosts of butter that once filled the jar. She lifts the cloth slowly, and inside she sees only the bare clay, glazed with a faint sheen of grease. A hollow vessel. A heart without blood. The child, who has been watching from the straw bed, lifts his head. His eyes, wide and uncertain, follow every movement of his grandmother. She turns the crock toward the firelight to be certain, but the truth is plain. Not a scrap remains. The last of it had been spread thinly on a crust of bread the morning before, enough to soften the hard loaf for the boy's aching teeth. For a long moment, she does not move. The silence thickens. The wind presses against the walls, as though the whole world knows the crock is empty.
She places the linen back, tying it again, not because it serves any use, but because leaving it uncovered feels too final, too much like surrender.
The boy speaks, his voice thin. Is there none left?
She forces a smile, though her lips are cracked and pale.
None in the crock, she answers gently, but perhaps something in the pan. She moves toward the hearth again. Hanging on the iron hook above the flames is a small, blackened pan that has served the family for years. In its corners cling the hardened remnants of fat from previous days, the drippings saved from scraps of meat, long since eaten. She takes a wooden spoon and carefully scrapes the sides, gathering what little glistens there. It is not butter, but it is fat. And fat is life. She tips the scrapings into a clay bowl, where they melt slowly near the fire, releasing a faint, savory smell that fills the room. The boy leans closer, nose twitching. The smell alone eases him, reminding him of fuller meals long past.
She sees the way his shoulders relax, his eyes half close as the warmth and aroma surround him.
For the child, scent is almost as powerful as substance.
The woman, it is a reminder of ingenuity, how often women like her have stretched what little they had until it could be stretched no further, and then still found one more way.
She sets a pot of water on the fire and stirs in a handful of coarse oats, saved from the autumn harvest. They swell slowly, softening, thickening the water into a pale gruel.
Without butter, without milk, it is humble and bland, but the scrapings of fat begin to coat the oats, giving them sheen and fragrance.
As she stirs, she hums quietly, a tune she has carried since girlhood. The melody is slow and low, almost like a prayer. The boy shifts on his straw bed, listening. His eyes drift to the butter crock again, and she sees the shadow in his gaze. To him, the empty jar is more than food, it is security, comfort, a sign that the house is not yet beaten by winter. Seeing it bare is frightening. So, she tells him a story. As she stirs the oats, a tale her mother told her, of how butter itself was once a gift from the saints, discovered when a shepherd's daughter left her skin of milk too near the fire. By accident, it churned itself into golden lumps, richer than milk, softer than cream. She describes the girl's astonishment, the joy of tasting something new, the way the whole village gathered to share in the miracle. Her voice is calm, steady, painting images into the cold air. Boy listens, his eyes heavy but curious. Did the saints give it to us, too? He asks softly. They did, she replies, and though the crock is empty now, it will be full again when spring returns. Butter is patient. It always waits for the grass to grow, for the cows to feed, for milk to flow. He nods, comforted by the thought that butter is not gone forever, only resting, waiting for the earth to wake. The woman feels the weight in her chest ease slightly. She has replaced despair with hope, even if only for a night. The oats finish cooking, a thin porridge, pale and steaming. She lifts the pot, sets it down on the hearthstone, and ladles a portion into a wooden bowl. She sprinkles over the melted scrapings of fat. The surface gleams faintly in the firelight. She brings it to the boy, blowing gently to cool the steam. He takes the first sip with care, then another, and soon the bowl is lighter in his hands. The warmth spreads through his body, and his eyelids lower, heavy with relief. She watches him eat, and though her own stomach growls in protest, she feels a quiet satisfaction. He is fed. That is enough. For herself, she will scrape what remains, sip the last thin liquid at the bottom of the pot. The hunger will stay, but so will her resolve. When the boy finishes, she wipes his lips and tucks the blanket tighter around him. His breath slows, deepens, and he drifts into sleep. She sets the empty bowl aside and returns to the butter crock once more. Lifting the linen, she gazes into its emptiness, but now her expression is softer. The jar is a promise, not a failure.
She whispers again, almost as if to the vessel itself, "You will be full again." Then she places it back upon the shelf, ties the cloth and turns toward the fire.
The small flames still dance, patient and enduring. She settles near them, drawing her knees to her chest, resting her head against the stones. The night outside howls and presses, but within the cottage, there is warmth, there is a story, there is a child sleeping with a belly not quite empty. The butter is gone, yes, but hope, fragile and flickering like the fire, remains.
So she closes her eyes, listening to the crackle of the wood, whispering one last prayer for tomorrow, that the hearth will light again, that the oats will stretch one more day, that the jar, though empty tonight, is only waiting for spring.
Morning comes slowly in January. The light does not rush into the world, but creeps, grey and uncertain, across frozen fields and into the gaps of the shuttered window. Inside the cottage, the fire has dimmed again, leaving only a weak ember in the ashes. The woman rises before her grandson stirs, pulling her shawl close around her shoulders. Hunger wakes with her, as steady as the cold. Today, she must face another trial, the last of the bread. On a shelf above the hearth lies a small loaf of black bread. She had baked it weeks ago from barley and rye, the poor grains of peasants. Unlike wheat, which only the wealthy could afford, these coarse grains were ground at the village mill, mixed with water and left to rise barely at all. The loaf is squat, dense, almost more brick than bread. She had saved it for a time such as this, when nothing fresh remained. She takes it down now, feeling its weight. The crust is dark, nearly black, baked hard in the old clay oven. She sets it on the table and presses a finger against it. The loaf does not yield.
It is as hard as stone, and in truth, it could break a tooth if eaten as it is. The boy, waking slowly, sees the bread in her hands and sits up with expectant eyes.
For a moment, despair prickles at her heart. What can she do with such a thing? How can a child gnaw through stone? Yet she knows the secrets passed down through generations. She takes the black loaf, sets it on the chopping block, and lifts a small knife. With effort, she saws through the tough crust, each scrape loud in the silence of the room. At last she frees a piece the size of her hand. The interior is grey-brown, pocked with seeds and husks, dry as dust. She sets a pot of water on the hearth and lowers the bread into it. Slowly, as the water heats, the loaf begins to soften. She stirs gently with a wooden spoon, breaking the chunk into smaller pieces. The bread drinks the water greedily, swelling, loosening, becoming once again something that can be chewed. She adds a pinch of salt, one of the few she dares to spend, and the pot begins to smell faintly wholesome. As she stirs, she remembers the harvest days of her youth, when bread was plentiful. She recalls great communal ovens at the edge of the village, their chimneys sending smoke into the sky, and women bringing baskets of dough to bake in long rows. The air would be rich with the smell of baking, and the loaves, though never fine white wheat, were hearty, filling, and shared among many. Now, in the dead of winter, this single black loaf feels like treasure beyond measure. The boy creeps to her side, rubbing his eyes. He peers into the pot. Will it be soft? He asks. It will be soft enough. She assures him. She does not promise more. In truth, she cannot. But her voice is steady, and that is what he needs. The water thickens as the bread dissolves, becoming a kind of porridge, known in their world as pottage, the staple of peasant life. Every day, in every cottage across the land, some version of pottage simmered on the fire: oats, beans, turnips, leeks or stale bread boiled until it could be eaten with a spoon. It was not glamorous, but it was survival. The woman ladles some into a wooden bowl and hands it to the boy. Steam rises, carrying the scent of warm grain. He dips the spoon, lifts it carefully to his lips, and swallows. His shoulders drop, and a small smile flickers across his face. It is good, he whispers, though he knows it is not sweet, nor rich, nor filling. Yet after days of thin oats and little fat, the taste of bread, even black and boiled, feels like abundance. She takes her own portion afterward, sipping slowly. The bread is soft now, but heavy, sitting in the stomach like a stone. She knows this heaviness will at least quiet the pangs for a while. She chews slowly, remembering how in wealthier households, wheat bread was so prized that it was reserved for lords and priests. The poor rarely touched it. They were left with barley, rye, and oats, grains considered coarse and fit only for animals in better circles. And yet, for centuries, these coarse breads kept millions alive. As she eats, she looks once more at the remaining loaf on the shelf. Only half is left now. If she cuts carefully, softens each piece in water, she might stretch it for 3 more days. Beyond that, she will have to rely on oats alone, and perhaps the roots still buried in the cellar pit beneath the floor. The boy finishes his bowl and leans back, content for now. His hunger has eased, his cheeks carry a faint flush from the heat of the fire.
He picks up a crumb fallen on the blanket and licks it from his finger, unwilling to waste even that.
The woman sees this and feels both sadness and pride. He understands already what scarcity means, and he does not complain. Outside, the faint light has grown. She steps to the door and opens it briefly. The cold rushes in, sharp and merciless. The fields lie barren, the ground frozen, the trees stripped of leaves. Nothing stirs. She closes the door quickly, shutting out the cruel landscape.
Within the cottage, the small fire and the scent of boiled bread seem suddenly rich, protective, like a barrier against a world that would otherwise swallow them whole.
She returns to the table, cuts another sliver of the loaf, and wraps it carefully in cloth.
She places it high on the shelf, out of reach of mice, and whispers as though to herself, "One piece today, one tomorrow, one the day after. It is not enough, but it is a plan." Before she sits again, she takes the empty crock from the day before and places it beside the bread on the shelf.
2 vessels, one bare and one dwindling, stand together like silent companions. They remind her of what has been lost, but also of what she still holds. She places her hand on the bread for a moment, then lowers it, steadying herself. As the boy curls back beneath his blanket, warmed and comforted, she sits by the hearth. The flames flicker softly, reflecting in her tired eyes. The world outside may be frozen and barren, but within these walls, there is bread enough for tonight.
And so, though the loaf is black and hard, though it is nearly gone, it has given them strength. The stone has softened, the hunger has eased, and for a few precious hours, winter itself feels a little further away.
The bread, softened in water and swallowed with patience, has done its duty for the morning. Yet hunger never rests long in January, and by midday, the boy's stomach begins to stir again. The woman, sitting near the hearth with her hands folded in her lap, feels her own emptiness gnawing at her insides. She knows what remains in the house. Not much.
A few handfuls of oats, half a loaf of black bread, a smear of fat in a pan, and in the dark pit beneath the floorboards, the last of the root vegetables from the autumn harvest.
She rises slowly, joints stiff from the cold, and crosses to the corner where a small wooden trapdoor lies flush with the earth floor. It creaks when she lifts it, sending a draft of colder air up from below. A musty scent fills the room, the mingling smells of earth, damp, and aging vegetables. She lowers herself carefully, holding a small clay lamp, and descends the short ladder into the root cellar. Here, in the hollowed-out pit, baskets of straw once brimmed with cabbages, onions, carrots, and turnips. Now, in the depth of winter, only a few sad remnants remain. She bends over the nearest basket, brushing aside brittle stalks and straw. At the bottom lie several turnips, wrinkled, shriveled, their skins puckered like old parchment. Some are soft to the touch, beginning to rot at the edges. Others are firm enough still to be used, if she cuts away the worst. She lifts 3 into her arms, their weight light, almost nothing compared to what they once were. Climbing back into the kitchen, she sets them down on the table. The boy looks at them eagerly, but she sees the doubt in his eyes. He remembers the taste of fresh turnips from autumn, sweet, crisp, filling. These, with their withered skins and faint smell of damp, promise little. She takes up her knife and begins to peel. The first slice reveals flesh that is soft and brown near the edge, so she cuts deeper, discarding the spoiled parts. Bit by bit, she rescues the heart of the root. The second turnip is worse, and much is lost before she reaches a piece that can be cooked. By the time she is done, what began as 3 turnips has become barely enough to fill her palm. Still, she gathers the salvaged pieces into a bowl and carries them to the hearth. In the blackened pot she has already set water to boil. She drops the fragments in, and soon the faintest scent of turnip rises, earthy and sharp. The boy leans closer, breathing in the smell, and asks, "Will it taste good?" She smiles gently. "It will taste warm." It is all she can promise.
As the pieces soften in the boiling water, she recalls the harvest days, when turnips were pulled fresh from the earth, their leaves still green, their bulbs round and firm.
In autumn, entire fields glowed with them, and baskets were heavy. She remembers storing them in great piles, layering them with straw, confident that they would last through the winter. But time is relentless, and the cold spares nothing. The best are eaten first, the rest grow weak, and by January, even the turnips surrender. She stirs the pot with a wooden spoon, listening to the bubbling water. For peasants like her, the turnip was more than a vegetable, it was a symbol of endurance. Not as noble as wheat, not as sweet as fruit, but hardy, reliable, willing to grow in poor soil where little else would. Perhaps that is why she feels a kinship with them, wrinkled and weary though they are. The boy shifts nearer to the fire, his eyes fixed on the pot. His hunger sharpens the smell into something grander than it is. She ladles out a small portion into a wooden bowl, mashing the softened pieces with the back of her spoon until they break apart. The result is thin, more broth than food, but it carries the taste of the earth, the memory of autumn. She places the bowl in his hands. He sips carefully, then takes a second spoonful and a third. The warmth spreads through him, and soon the color returns faintly to his cheeks. "It is good," he says, though his voice is quiet. She knows it is not good. Not in the way feasts are. But it is enough. She takes her own portion afterward, savoring each bite. The broth coats her tongue with a bitterness that speaks of age, but beneath it is a sweetness, faint but real, a reminder that life persists even when waning. She eats, slowly, stretching each spoonful, listening to the wind outside as it batters the walls.
When the bowls are empty, she sets them aside and looks again at the pile of peels and discarded scraps on the table.
Waste is dangerous in winter, yet she cannot risk feeding the boy spoiled flesh. Still, she gathers the cleanest of the peels and sets them aside, planning to dry them near the fire. Even a handful of dry turnip skin might flavor a broth tomorrow. The boy lies back down on his straw bed, his stomach no longer crying, his eyes close as he listens to the quiet hum his grandmother begins to sing. It is an old lullaby, carried through the village for generations, about the turning of the seasons.
She hums it as she tidies the table, as she places the last fragments of salvage turnip back into the cellar, as she closes the trapdoor and presses it shut.
The fire flickers on, steady for now. The woman sits before it once more, her hands folded, her thoughts lingering on what remains. Half a loaf of bread, a few oats, some scraps of fat, and, deep in the cellar, a handful more turnips, each one shriveling with every passing day. Yet she feels a quiet determination hardening within her. Like the roots themselves, she will endure. The boy stirs in his sleep, murmuring softly, and she tucks the blanket around him. The cottage is poor, the food plain, the winter cruel, but the child sleeps with warmth in his belly. That is victory enough. And so, though the turnips are withered, though they crumble in her hands, they have given life for one more day. In this season, that is all that can be asked, and all that can be treasured. The hours pass slowly in a medieval January. The daylight is thin, the grey sky never lifting, and before long evening gathers once more around the cottage. The fire is coaxed into life with the last scraps of wood for the day, casting flickering shadows across the low beams. The woman has stretched the food as far as she could: porridge at dawn, softened bread by noon, turnip broth by dusk. It is enough to keep them breathing, but not enough to silence the hunger entirely. When night folds in, heavy and unrelenting, the boy curls again into his straw bed.
The woman tucks the worn blanket close around him and hums as she always does, a melody low and steady, designed more to soothe her own heart than his.
For a little while, he drifts into sleep, his breathing shallow but even. The fire whispers beside them, burning low, the only sound against the moan of wind outside. But hunger has its own voice, and it does not rest. Sometime in the night, the boy begins to stir. His face tightens, his hands clutch at the blanket, and a soft cry escapes his lips. At first it is a whimper, the sound of a dream troubled by shadows. Soon it grows into a muffled sob, and then into words, "Grandmother, I am hungry." The woman wakes instantly. Her own stomach has long since learned to sleep through emptiness, but the cry of a child cuts sharper than any blade. She leans toward him, brushing back his damp hair, whispering soft words of comfort. Yet the words alone cannot fill the hollow ache in his belly. His eyes, wide and shining in the faint firelight, plead for something more. She looks toward the shelf, the half loaf of black bread wrapped in cloth, waiting for tomorrow. She knows she cannot spend it all in one night. Each portion is measured like gold. Still, the boy's cry pierces her heart. She rises quietly, careful not to wake the cold air too much, and takes down the bundle. Unwrapping it, she cuts the smallest piece she dares, no larger than her palm. The crust is still hard, though softer than it had been that morning thanks to the steam of the hearth. She lowers it into a pot with a little water, stirring until the edges soften. The smell of warm grain fills the air again, faint but comforting. The boy watches, eyes wide, the cry in his throat fading into silence. Hunger is momentarily replaced by hope. She ladles the softened bread into a small wooden cup and carries it to him. He takes it eagerly, sipping the thick broth, chewing what pieces remain. The tears on his cheeks dry, replaced by the quiet concentration of eating. Each spoonful is like treasure.
She strokes his back as he swallows, whispering, "There now, the night will pass, tomorrow will come, and with it, something more." As he eats, she remembers her own childhood and winters long gone. She remembers waking in the night, as her grandson does now, with the same ache in her belly, the same desperate cry on her lips.
She remembers her mother's hands, rough but gentle, bringing her a spoonful of warm broth, whispering the same words she now repeats.
She feels, in that moment, the chain of mothers and grandmothers stretching back through time, each one facing the same nights, the same cries, the same desperate calculations of how to stretch food from one sunrise to the next.
The boy finishes the last bite and leans back against her. His eyelids droop, his breathing slows. She rocks him gently, back and forth, humming a lullaby older than memory. The song tells of fields that will bloom again, of rivers that will thaw, of cattle returning to pasture. It is a song of spring, sung in the dead of winter. The fire crackles softly, the flames low but steady. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, but inside the cottage, the child sleeps again, full enough for now. The woman places the cup aside, wraps him tighter in the blanket, and eases him back onto the straw bed. She watches him for a long time, her own hunger gnawing, but her heart calmed by the sight of his peaceful face. She knows that tomorrow the bread will be less, the cellar emptier, the challenge is greater. But tonight, the cry has been silenced, not by despair, but by warmth and care. Tonight, she has done what countless women before her have done, turned scarcity into solace, transformed hunger into sleep. The hearth glows faintly, casting its light across the room. The butter crock, empty, waits on the shelf. The bread loaf, smaller now, rests beside it. And beneath the floor, the last withered turnips wait their turn. The woman closes her eyes, listening to the steady breath of the boy. In this fragile moment, in this poor cottage battered by winter, there is peace. And so, though the child's cry began as sharp as the winter wind, it has been answered with patience, with a softened crust, with a grandmother's lullaby. The night, once filled with sorrow, is filled now with the soft rhythm of sleep. Night in January is never still. Even when the cottage is quiet, the world outside presses against it with restless force. The woman, though drowsy from exhaustion, cannot slip easily into sleep.
Her ears are tuned to every sound, the boy's steady breathing, the fading crackle of the fire, and above it all, the sigh and groan of the winter wind pushing through the beams of the roof.
The roof itself is a fragile guardian. It is made of thatch, bundles of reeds and straw layered thickly over wooden poles. In summer, it is strong, holding back the rain. In autumn, it muffles the sound of birds. But in winter, when the wind whips across the fields like 1,000 invisible whips, the thatch whispers and rustles, letting in drafts of cold air. Tonight, the wind finds every weakness. It whistles through tiny cracks, carrying with it fine dust that drifts down like ash. The woman pulls her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She knows the roof cannot hold forever. The weight of snow, the pressure of storms, the endless gnaw of weather, it all takes its toll. In wealthier homes, roofs are repaired yearly, new thatch laid, beams reinforced. Here, she must patch with what she has, scraps of cloth stuffed into gaps, handfuls of clay pressed into holes. The wind always returns. The boy stirs in his sleep as one particularly strong gust rattles the shutters and sends a cold stream of air across his straw bed. He whimpers, curling tighter beneath the blanket. The woman moves quickly, kneeling beside him, pressing her hand against the gap in the wall where the wind has slipped through. Her palm feels the icy breath of the night pressing against her skin. She murmurs soothing words, though they are more for herself than for him. The fire sputters at the draft, its small flames bending sideways. She adds another splinter of wood, though she hates to spend it. The crackle steadies, the smoke rises straight again, and the room regains a fragile warmth. She knows every piece of fuel is precious, but so is the peace of the child. As she sits back, she remembers the old sayings of her village, that the winter wind carried voices of spirits. Some claimed it was the sound of souls wandering restlessly, others that it was the whisper of saints reminding people to endure. She has no certainty which is true, but she listens all the same. Tonight the wind howls like a lament, long and mournful, echoing through the beams overhead. Her gaze lifts to the rafters. The wooden poles are rough, hewn long ago from nearby woods. Between them, the underside of the thatch shows, patched with rags, smeared with dried mud.
She recalls climbing onto the roof in autumn with her daughter years ago, pressing handfuls of straw into the weak spots, laughing when the dust fell into their hair.
That daughter is gone now, married to a man in another village, far away.
The woman wonders if she, too, hears the wind through her own beams tonight, if she also presses a hand to the wall to keep the cold away from her children.
The boy stirs again, muttering in his sleep. She bends to him, stroking his hair, humming a low tune. The draft has eased, the fire holds, and his breathing steadies once more. Still, the woman cannot forget the fragility of her home. The beams creak as another gust pushes against them. The thatch shifts slightly, releasing a few small flakes of straw that drift down into the room. She catches one on her palm and studies it, golden even in the dim firelight, a fragment of summer clinging to winter's night. She thinks of how much labor went into gathering the thatch, each stalk cut in the heat of August, bundled, dried, carried by hand. Work done when the sun was high, when bellies were full, when laughter was easy. And now, in January, that same straw is the only shield between them and the merciless cold. The thought steadies her. The summer lingers in the roof above them, a quiet promise that warmth will return. To distract herself, She begins to mend a tear in her shawl with needle and thread kept in a small wooden box. Each stitch is slow, careful in the dim light. The rhythm calms her, just as the rhythm of stirring a pot or kneading dough once did. She hums softly as she works, her voice blending with the sound of the wind outside. The boy breathes deeply now, lost to dreams. She prays that his dreams are gentle ones, filled with meadows and sunshine, not empty crocks and withered roots. She knows children of his age dream often of food when hungry, but she hopes tonight's warm broth has given him kinder visions. The wind continues to batter the cottage, but her heart is steadier. She has survived worse storms. Each creak of the beams reminds her not of weakness, but of endurance. These same rafters have held through many winters already. They will hold again. At last, when her stitches are complete, she sets the shawl aside and lies down near the hearth. She stretches her hands toward the fire one last time, feeling the faint warmth soothe her cracked skin. Above, the wind sighs through the roof beams, but its song has shifted. It no longer sounds like a lament. It is softer now, almost like a lullaby of its own, a reminder that night is long but not endless. She closes her eyes. The boy sleeps. The fire glows. The beams groan, but they hold. The cottage breathes quietly against the storm, fragile yet unbroken.
And so, while the wind weaves its voice through the rafters, a grandmother and child rest beneath, wrapped in the fragile peace of survival, trusting that the roof will shelter them until dawn.
In the villages of medieval Europe, the rhythm of the year was marked not only by the seasons, but by the calendar of the church. Every week and month carried holy days, feast days, saints' commemorations, moments when bells rang from the parish tower, when candles were lit, when villagers gathered to give thanks and share food. Even the poorest households tried to mark these days with something a little finer, a little brighter than ordinary fare. But in January, feasts were difficult to honor. The pantry was thin, the fields frozen, the animals lean.
Tonight, as the wind still curls around the cottage and the boy sleeps near the hearth, the woman sits with her hands folded in her lap, remembering that tomorrow is the feast of Saint Agnes.
In better years, there would have been a loaf baked in her name, perhaps a bit of honey saved, a portion of butter to make the bread tender. Families would carry their offerings to the church, and even the humblest peasant child might taste a sweetness. She glances toward the shelf, the empty butter crock, the dwindling loaf, the few scraps left from the turnips. Her heart sinks with the knowledge that she is nothing worthy to give. Not to the priest, not to the saint, not even to the boy, who should wake to a day of gladness. Once, she had been able to honor such feasts. She remembers kneading dough beside her daughter, pressing herbs into the crust for flavor, carrying the warm loaf in a cloth to the parish yard. There would be singing then, the smoke of incense, the mingled smells of bread and beeswax, the joy of voices lifted together. Now those memories feel as distant as summer. The boy stirs in his sleep and opens his eyes briefly. Is there a feast tomorrow? He asks, his voice drowsy. Yes, she answers gently. The Saint Agnes. Will there be sweet bread? His tone is hopeful, though uncertain. She cannot lie to him.
She strokes his hair and whispers, "Not this year. The saint will understand." He nods, closing his eyes again, accepting it as children do, though disappointment shadows his small face.
The woman's heart aches. She knows the feast days were not just about food, they were about belonging, about hope, about remembering that heaven had not forgotten them. To go without feels like being cut off from that larger family. She looks again at the half loaf of bread, and her mind wrestles with itself. Should she spend it all tomorrow, so the boy might taste something close to a feast? Or should she hold it back, stretching it for days to come? The practical voice within her insists on restraint. Hunger will not wait for saints. But another voice, quieter, more tender, longs to give him the joy of one bright day, even if it means sharper hunger later. She resolves upon a compromise.
Tomorrow, she will take a slice of the bread, soften it in hot water, and add the last pinch of honey she has hidden in a jar near the bed.
It will not be a feast, not as others have, but it will be something different, something sweeter, a token of celebration, a gesture of love. Perhaps the saint will bless them for it.
As she plans this, she recalls the teaching she has heard in church, that God sees not the size of the gift, but the heart behind it.
A crumb given in faith is greater than a feast offered in pride. These words steady her, reminding her that she is not alone in her struggle. Others in the village also face empty shelves, also wonder how to honor feast days with nothing. The saints, she thinks, must know the hunger of January. The fire pops softly, and she lifts her gaze to the flickering light.
Shadows play across the walls, and for a moment she imagines them as the figures of saints themselves, standing quietly in the corners of her poor home.
Watch, not with judgment, but with gentleness.
She bows her head, whispering a prayer, "Saint Agnes, see my empty hands, but know my heart. Let this child sleep in peace, and let tomorrow bring him joy." The boy breathes deeply again, slipping back into slumber. She sits beside him for a long while, watching the fire dim, thinking of the church bells that will ring in the morning.
They may not join the gathering, but in their own cottage they will mark the day with what they have. That, she decides, is enough. Outside, the wind continues its hymn, sweeping across the fields, rattling the thatch.
Inside, the woman and child rest in fragile warmth, holding onto the promise that even in hunger, there is room for reverence, for tenderness, for remembrance of the holy.
And so, though the feast day will pass without banquet or song, it will not be missed entirely. For in this cottage, love itself becomes the offering, and that is a feast the winter cannot take away. The morning after St. Agnes' Day arrives with the same grey light, the same sharp wind, the same empty shelves. The church bells in the distance ring faintly through the frosty air, and the woman pauses as she hears them, her heart stirring. She has kept her promise, a thin slice of bread softened with hot water, touched with the last drop of honey hidden in her jar. She gives it to the boy, and though it is small, his eyes brighten at the sweetness. For a moment, the cottage feels touched by the saint's blessing. But when the bells fade and the day stretches long, reality returns. The loaf is almost gone. Soon there will be no bread at all. She knows oats can fill the gap, roots can be boiled, but bread is more than food, it is life itself, the foundation of every meal. To lose bread is to lose hope. And so, she turns to an old trick, one whispered among women in lean years, the ash bread. The idea is simple, born of desperation. When flour runs thin, ashes from the hearth can be sifted, fine and grey, and mixed into dough. It stretches what little grain remains, makes a crust rise lighter, fools the eye into believing the loaf is larger. It is not delicious, not even truly wholesome, but it is sustenance when there is nothing else. She remembers hearing her mother speak of it, how during a harsh winter when she was a girl, they had lived for weeks on such bread. She sits before the hearth, gazing into the ashes. They lie soft and grey, still faintly warm from the morning fire. A wooden scoop, she lifts a small pile into a clay bowl, blowing gently to chase away the heavier cinders. The boy watches her curiously. "Why the ashes?" he asks. "To make the bread last," she replies softly. "They will trick the hunger into thinking there is more." He frowns, but says nothing. Hunger has already taught him not to question too deeply. From a cloth sack she measures the last handful of barley meal, coarse and scant. She mixes it with water, stirs it into a paste. Then, slowly, she adds the sifted ash, blending grey into brown. The dough grows, stretching beyond what the flour alone would have given. She kneads it on the table, her hands steady despite the rough texture. The ash makes the dough gritty, stubborn, but it holds together. She forms it into a small round, sets it on the hearthstone beside the fire, and covers it with the iron lid of her pan. Heat gathers beneath, slow and uneven. The smell that rises is strange, partly bread, partly smoke. Not unpleasant, but not the warm richness of true loaves either. Still, the boy's eyes follow the pan with anticipation. While it bakes, she recalls the old sayings that ashes purified, that they carried away sin. Priests would mark foreheads with ash at the beginning of Lent. Farmers would scatter ash on their fields to sweeten the soil. Perhaps, she thinks, to eat bread made with ash is not only necessity, but also a kind of penance, a way of sharing in the earth's hardship. At last, she lifts the pan. The loaf is small, its crust cracked and grey speckled, but it holds together. She breaks it in half, steam curling faintly upward. The inside is dense, uneven, flecked with black where the ash has mingled with the grain. She hands a piece to the boy, keeping the smaller half for herself. He bites carefully. The crust is hard, the flavour bitter, but the warmth fills his mouth. He chews slowly, swallowing with effort. It tastes strange. He whispers. "Yes," she agrees, biting her own portion. The bitterness stings her tongue, the ash catching in her teeth. Yet as it settles in her stomach, she feels the heaviness, the weight of something solid. It may not be pleasant, but it is food. And food, in January, is grace. They eat together in silence. Each mouthful is a labor, but each mouthful pushes hunger further away.
The boy finishes his piece and wipes his mouth with the back of his hand.
He does not complain.
She feels pride swell quietly. He is learning endurance, learning to accept what is given, to be grateful even when gratitude is hard.
Afterward, she places the pan aside and brushes the table clean. The ashes remain on her fingertips, grey smudges marking her skin.
She looks at them for a long moment, thinking how strange it is that what burns away at the end of the fire can still feed them.
Even what is lost can still be turned into life. The day wears on. The wind rattles the shutters, snow flurries drift against the roof, and the cottage remains a fragile island in a sea of winter. But inside, there is bread, strange bread, ash bread, but bread nonetheless.
She gathers her shawl around her and sits by the fire, the boy leaning against her side, drowsy from the meal.
She hums again, a slow tune, and he drifts towards sleep, his head heavy on her arm. As she watches the flames, she feels both sorrow and strength. Sorrow that her grandson must eat such bitter food, strength that she has found a way to keep him alive. In this balance lies survival. The ash bread is not feast, not joy, but it is a reminder that even from the ashes, life can begin again. And so, though hunger still lingers, though the winter still presses, the cottage holds one more secret of endurance.
In the humble round of grey speckled bread, there is a promise that they will endure another day, that ashes, too, can sustain the living.
Salt was life in the Middle Ages. To peasants, it was not simply a seasoning but a guardian of survival, reserving meat, keeping butter from spoiling, giving flavor to the endless bowls of pottage and bread. In winter especially, when every scrap had to last, salt was treasure. The woman knows this well. In autumn, she had traded for a small sack of coarse crystals from a traveling merchant. They had sparkled like pale jewels in the light of the hearth, precious as silver. Piece by piece she had spent them, pinching here for porridge, sprinkling there for broth. Now, in late January, only a handful remains, tucked in a tiny cloth pouch high upon the shelf. This evening, as the fire hums low and the boy sits near, she reaches for that pouch. The fabric is worn soft by use, the drawstring thin, but inside the salt still glitters faintly. She opens it carefully, not wanting even a grain to spill, and tips it into her palm. The pile is small, barely enough to cover her thumb. She feels her heart tighten. The boy watches her with quiet eyes. He remembers when the salt pouch was heavy, when she would dip her fingers freely.
Now, he sees the way she cradles it, the way her hands tremble slightly, and he understands without words.
She sets a pot of oats on the fire, stirring the coarse grains into water. Without salt, the porridge would be bland, almost bitter.
She knows the boy has grown weary of the same taste, day after day, and so she does what she can.
From the pouch, she pinches the smallest amount, few bright crystals, and sprinkles them into the pot. The grains melt instantly, vanishing into the broth, but their gift remains. The smell deepens, the steam carries a hint of richness, and the boy leans forward eagerly. As she stirs, she thinks of how salt travels farther than any villager ever will.
From mines deep in the earth, from seas evaporated by sun, carried on the backs of donkeys, in the carts of merchants, through towns and forests, until at last it rests in her hand.
To waste a grain feels like wasting the journey of 100 miles.
She whispers a small prayer as she ties the pouch again. Let this last until spring. Let there always be enough. The porridge thickens, bubbling softly.
She ladles it into 2 bowls, handing the larger to the boy. He takes a spoonful, and at once his eyes brighten. It tastes good, he says with a small smile. She nods, tasting her own portion. The difference is real, small, but powerful. The salt awakens the oats, draws out what sweetness lies hidden, turns plain gruel into something that feels almost like a meal. They eat in silence, the boy content, the woman grateful. Yet even as the warmth spreads through her, she cannot stop thinking of the pouch, so light now in her hand. Perhaps only 2 pinches remain. 3 at most. After that, the porridge will be grey and dull, the broth tasteless, the hunger harder to disguise. She remembers the salt fairs of her youth, when great blocks of white were sold in the town square, carried in on wagons, guarded like treasure. She remembers her mother bargaining for a lump that would last the season, breaking it apart with a hammer to store in jars. Salt was always expensive, always a reminder that the world beyond the village held wealth and power they could only glimpse. For peasants, salt was a mark of class. Nobles had it in abundance, sprinkling it freely, preserving meats in thick layers. In her cottage, each crystal is weighed like a coin. The thought stings, but she pushes it aside. Tonight, the boy is smiling, and that is worth any cost. When the bowls are empty, she scrapes the sides clean, unwilling to waste even a smear. She gathers the pouch once more, tucks it carefully into the corner of the shelf beside the butter crock and the bread bundle. 3 symbols of survival, one empty, one dwindling, one nearly gone. The boy curls beneath his blanket, sighing softly in contentment. His belly is not full, but it is calmed, and the taste of salt lingers like a comfort on his tongue.
She watches him as his eyes close, and she feels both sorrow and relief.
Sorrow for what is vanishing, relief that she still has enough to give. She sits by the fire, holding her hands to the glow. The salt pouch rests heavy in her mind, a reminder that every meal from now on must be measured more carefully than the last. Yet she also recalls the words of the priest, that salt, in scripture, was a symbol of covenant, of preservation, of endurance. "Ye are the salt of the earth," he once preached. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps she and all women like her are the salt of the earth, quiet, humble, preserving life in silence while the world storms outside. The fire crackles, the beams creak, and the night grows long.
The woman closes her eyes, whispering another prayer, this one more simple, let the salt last, let it be enough. And so, though the pouch is nearly empty, though the grains slip quickly through her fingers, its gift is felt tonight.
In the warmth of porridge, in the brightness of the boy's smile, in the quiet peace of the cottage, the last pinches of salt prove greater than their measure. The next morning dawns grey once again, the sky low and heavy as though it wished to press the village flat beneath its weight. The fire smoulders weakly, and the woman coaxes it back with careful breath, feeding it a sliver of wood. The boy still sleeps on his straw bed, his face turned toward the warmth, but her own stomach rumbles. She knows the oats are thinning, the bread nearly gone, the turnips withered. Each day the margin grows narrower. It is then she hears a knock, soft, hesitant, the door. In these months, such a sound always brings a mix of hope and dread. A neighbor's knock may mean news, or it may mean need. She rises and opens the door, and there stands another woman, older than herself, wrapped in a patched cloak. Snow clings to the hem, and her face is pale from the cold. In her arms she carries a small bundle. "Good morning," the neighbor whispers. Her voice is hoarse. "I wonder, do you have anything left? A scrap of salt, perhaps? My own has run out." The woman's heart clenches. She thinks at once of her pouch so light, with only a few pinches left. To part with even a grain feels impossible. Yet she sees the desperation in her neighbor's eyes, the same shadow that haunts her own. Behind her, she imagines the neighbor's cottage, children thin, cupboards bare, fire fading. She hesitates. In such times, survival urges selfishness, but another force presses back, the memory of other winters, when her own family had been saved by the generosity of neighbors. Once, when her daughter was a baby, a widow had shared a jar of peas that lasted them through a hungry week. That kindness had kept them alive. Could she do less now? Still, she must balance need with need. She cannot hand over all. Her fingers tighten on the pouch as she lifts it from the shelf. She untees the cord, tips it gently into her palm, and measures out a small pinch of crystals, just enough to flavor a meal. She folds it carefully into a scrap of linen and presses it into the neighbor's hands. The older woman's eyes glisten with gratitude. She reaches into her bundle and pulls out 2 onions, wrinkled but whole, their papery skins rustling. "Take these," she says softly. "They are all I can spare." The woman accepts them, her heart easing. Their sharpness, their warmth, their ability to turn even thin broth into something fragrant. The trade is small but precious, salt for onions, both giving what they cannot keep, both receiving what they most lack. They exchange a few words of blessing. Then the neighbor turns back into the snow, her cloak trailing behind her. The woman closes the door and holds the onions close, breathing in their pungent scent. She feels a flicker of hope. With these, the turnips will taste richer, the oats less dull. The boy will smile again, the difference. When he wakes, she shows him the onions. His eyes widen with delight, as though she had brought treasure from the market. "How did we get them?" he asks. "From a friend." She answers simply. "We shared what we had, and she shared in return." He nods thoughtfully, chewing his lip. Even at his age, he understands the risk of giving away what little you possess. Yet he also feels the warmth of the trade. He sees that hunger is not endured alone. Later that day, she chops one onion into thin slices, adding it to a pot with the salvaged turnip skins she had dried near the fire. The smell that rises fills the cottage, sharp, sweet, comforting. The boy inhales deeply, eyes bright. The broth, though thin, tastes richer than anything they have eaten in days. Each spoonful carries not only flavor, but the memory of kindness, the strength of community. As they eat, she tells him stories of the old ways, how in times of famine villages survived by binding together. Families would pool their last grains, share firewood, watch over one another's children. It was never easy. There were always those who took more than they gave, but often it was enough to carry them through the worst. The boy listens, nodding, a soft smile on his lips.
He does not know yet how long the winter will last, but he understands that generosity can feed the spirit as much as food feeds the body.
That night, as the wind sighs against the walls, the woman rests easier than she has in weeks. She thinks of her neighbor, warming her own children with salted broth, and feels comfort in the thought that her pinch of salt has stretched beyond her own home. In return, the onions simmer in her hearth, filling her cottage with a scent that drives away despair. The pouch is lighter now. Perhaps only 2 pinches remain, but her heart feels heavier with strength.
She has given, and she has received, and in that exchange she has remembered something important, that survival in January is not a solitary act.
It is a weaving together of lives, a fragile net of sharing that holds the village against the storm. And so, though the cupboard is still nearly bare, though the firewood is low, the cottage tonight is filled with more than hunger. It is filled with the taste of onion broth, the warmth of gratitude, and the quiet knowledge that they are not alone. The days of January blur into one another, grey dawn, bitter wind, meagre meals, early nightfall. Hunger gnaws steadily. But hunger is not the only enemy. Cold slips beneath the skin, weakens the body, opens the door to sickness. It begins with a cough. At first, soft and small, from the boy's throat as he sleeps. The woman brushes it off. Perhaps just the draught, perhaps the smoke from the hearth. But by morning, the cough grows harsher. His cheeks are flushed, his forehead warm to the touch. She presses her hand against his brow and feels the heat rising. Her heart pounds. She knows how dangerous a child's fever can be in winter. Medicines are scarce. The village healer has little more than herbs, and the nearest monastery with true remedies is many miles away. In such times, a grandmother's care is all that stands between sickness and sorrow. The boy shivers beneath his blanket, eyes half closed. In cold, he whispers, though his skin burns hot. She pulls the blanket tighter, tucking straw around him for insulation. She adds another stick of wood to the fire, though she hates to waste it. Warmth is medicine now. Then, she thinks of remedies known to women for generations. She takes one of the onions from the neighbor's gift, peels it carefully, and slices it thin. She drops the pieces into a small pot with water and sets it over the fire. As it simmers, the pungent scent fills the cottage, sharp and biting, clearing her own nose. She hopes it will ease the boy's breathing. When the broth is ready, she pours a little into a wooden cup. She cools it with her breath and presses it to his lips. "Drink, child," she murmurs. He obeys, swallowing slowly. The liquid is thin, the taste sharp, but soon his breathing steadies a little. She lays a damp cloth on his forehead, wiping away the sweat. All through the day, she tends him. She hums lullabies, stirs the fire, whispers prayers. The boy drifts in and out of sleep, sometimes murmuring nonsense, sometimes calling for his mother who is far away. Each time his eyes close too long, fear claws at her chest. She knows how many children are lost to winter fevers. She's seen too many small graves dug into frozen earth. Yet, she also knows resilience. She recalls her own childhood, when fever laid her low. Her mother had wrapped her in wool, spooned onion broth into her mouth, prayed over her as she does now. She survived, and so might he. As night falls, the fever rises again. The boy trembles, sweat soaking his hair. She places another cloth on his brow, whispering, "You are safe, my little one. You are warm. We'll see the morning." Her voice is steady, though her heart is not. She thinks again of the saints, of Saint Agnes whose feast they had missed. She whispers a plea, "Watch over him. Do not let him slip away."
The only reply is the sigh of the wind and the crackle of the fire, but she feels comfort in the speaking.
At last, near midnight, the boy's breathing deepens. The fever breaks, sweat cooling on his skin. His face, pale but calmer, rests quietly against the blanket. She touches his cheek and finds it no longer burning. Relief floods her chest. She leans back, tears slipping silently down her face, tears of gratitude rather than grief. The fire has burned low, but she dares not rise to feed it. She remains at his side, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath. Her body aches from hours of watchfulness, but her heart is lightened. He has passed through the worst. By dawn, he stirs, opening his eyes. Hungry, he whispers hoarsely. She laughs softly, brushing his hair back. "But that means you are well." She rises and warms what remains of the onion broth, mixing it with a scrap of bread. He eats, slowly, his strength returning with each bite. She feels a wave of peace wash over her.
Though winter presses, though the pantry is nearly bare, though hunger crouches at the door, her grandson still breathes, still eats, still smiles faintly at her.
That is enough. The cottage, battered though it is, holds them safe for another day. The fire glows. The boy rests, and the woman, weary but steadfast, whispers thanks to heaven. And so, though sickness came in the night with fear and fever, it has been met with care, with broth, with lullabies, with faith. The danger has passed, and in its place lies a fragile calm, precious as gold. By the next evening, the boy's fever has eased. He sits near the hearth again, pale but smiling faintly as he toys with a small stick of wood, tracing lines in the ash at his feet. The woman watches him, relief softening the deep lines on her face. Yet though his strength returns, hunger remains, and with hunger comes weariness of the same thin meals. Tonight's supper is oat gruel again, flavored only by a shred of dried onion peel. It fills the stomach, but not the spirit. As they eat in silence, the sound of distant bells drifts across the frozen fields. The woman pauses, listening. These are not the slow, solemn tolls of the parish church. They are bright and hurried, ringing out like laughter in metal. She knows what they mean. The manor on the hill is feasting. The boy tilts his head. "What is that sound?" he asks. She swallows her spoonful before answering. It is the bells of the Lord's Hall. They ring for joy, for music, for guests. The boy's eyes widen. They're eating. "Yes," she says softly. She pictures it easily. Inside the great stone hall, tapestries hang against the walls, braziers burn hot, banishing winter's chill. Long tables groan beneath platters of roasted meat, beef, pork, venison hunted from the forest. Loaves of white wheat bread, rarest of all, are stacked high, served to nobles as freely as barley is to peasants. Jugs of red wine flow, goblets clink, voices rise in laughter. Outside, snow drifts against the windows, but within, the air is warm with fire and feast. The boy lowers his gaze to his bowl, staring at the thin porridge. "Do they have enough?" "More than enough," she answers gently. For a moment, bitterness pricks at her heart.
She has seen it before, carts laden with grain taken from fields where peasants bent their backs, carried up the hill to the Lord's cellar while the village kept only scraps.
She knows the laws that bind them, the rents, the tithes, the endless labor owed. And yet, as the sound of distant laughter drifts across the night, she does not let resentment harden. She is too tired for anger. She focuses instead on the fire before her, on the child at her side, on the small miracle of broth and bread stretched one more day. Still, she cannot deny the contrast. In the manor, music echoes, boots stamp upon the floor in dance, plates are piled high and wine stains lips crimson. In her cottage, The spoon scrapes quietly against the wooden bowl, and the fire sputters low. Two worlds, side by side, yet separated by walls thicker than stone. The boy, sensing her silence, leans against her shoulder. Will we ever eat like that? He whispers. She kisses his hair. Perhaps not. But we will eat enough. Sometimes, enough is better than plenty. He frowns, not fully understanding, but her voice soothes him. He finishes the last of his gruel, then sets the bowl aside. She takes it and places it near the hearth, already thinking of how to stretch tomorrow's meal. Outside, the bells ring again, joined now by faint strains of music, pipes and drums carrying over the frozen air. The boy's eyes grow heavy with the sound, and soon he drifts towards sleep. She hums quietly to mask the noise, her melody simple, steady, like the heartbeat of the cottage itself. As she hums, her thoughts wander. She imagines the hall above the village, the flicker of torches on the walls, the laughter of lords and ladies. She also imagines the waste, the bones thrown aside, the crusts left uneaten, the barrels drained. She wonders if they know hunger as she does, if they have ever heard a child cry out in the night for food. Perhaps not. Perhaps they never will.
But here in this small cottage, laughter exists too, quiet laughter, shared between grandmother and child when the fire sparks unexpectedly, when the broth tastes better than expected, when a story makes the boy smile.
It is not the roar of a feast, but it is enough to keep despair away. Bells fade at last. The music softens. The night settles. The boy sleeps soundly, his breath even, his face calm. The woman sits by the fire, the flicker reflecting in her eyes, and whispers to herself, "Let them feast. We will endure." And so, though the manor laughs while the cottage eats in silence, both see the night through. One with abundance, the other with resilience. And in the quiet heart of the cottage, endurance feels as noble as any banquet. Morning comes faint and grey once more. The woman wakes early, her bones stiff from the cold, her ears still echoing faintly with the memory of the manor's bells the night before. She coaxes the fire to life again, blowing carefully into the ashes until a flame stirs. The boy still sleeps beneath his blanket, his cheeks pale, his breath steady. She watches him for a moment, grateful, then turns toward the shelf where the last of their food is stored. The sight is disheartening. Half a loaf of black bread reduced to a crust, a pouch of salt nearly empty, a few shriveled turnips in the cellar. It is not enough. She rubs her forehead, feeling the weight of despair press against her chest. Yet she knows she cannot give in. The boy depends on her. She begins tidying the shelf, shifting bowls and jars to take stock of what remains. As she lifts one clay pot, dusty and forgotten, something stirs within. She frowns, opens the lid, and her breath catches. Inside lies a bundle of dried herbs, tied with a strip of twine.
The leaves are brittle, faded to gray-green, but they release a faint aroma when she brings them close to her face. Sage, perhaps, and a bit of thyme.
She had gathered them months ago, in late summer, when the garden still grew strong. She had hung them near the fire to dry, intending to use them for flavoring broth or for healing teas. But in the rush of harvest and the press of hardship, she had forgotten them. Till now. Her heart lifts. It is a small thing, this bundle of herbs. But in January, small things are treasures. She carries it to the hearth, crumbles a few leaves between her fingers, and sprinkles them into the pot of boiling water. At once, the air fills with a fragrance sharp and clean, like a whisper of summer drifting into the frozen room. The boy stirs in his bed, sniffing. His eyes blink open. "What is that smell?" he asks softly. "Herbs," she answers with a smile. "From the garden. Do you remember?" He nods faintly, though the memory is blurred.
She recalls it clearly, him running through the rows, laughing as bees hummed over the blossoms, his hands reaching out to touch the green leaves. She tells him of it now, her voice gentle. These grew when the sun was high, when the earth was warm. They carry the taste of that season, even now. She ladles a little of the herbal broth into a cup and brings it to him.
He sips carefully, his face lighting up. It tastes different, like the garden. "Yes," she says, like summer returning for a moment. She drinks some herself, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. The bitterness of sage, the brightness of thyme. It is not food that fills the belly, but it awakens the spirit. It reminds her that the earth is not dead, only sleeping, and that soon the fields will stir again. As they drink, she tells the boy how herbs were used in their village, how wise women brewed teas to ease coughs, how sprigs were hung above doors to ward off evil, how thyme was burned in sick rooms to cleanse the air. He listens with wide eyes, comforted by the idea that even these dry leaves carry power. She crumbles a little more into the pot, mixing it with a scrap of bread and onion. The smell grows richer, the taste brighter. The boy eats slowly, savoring every spoonful, as though the herbs themselves are a feast. She smiles, her heart lighter than it has been in weeks. Afterward, she ties the bundle carefully and places it back on the shelf. There is still enough for several more days if she is sparing. Each pinch will transform a thin broth into something fragrant. Each cup of tea will soothe the body and mind. At evening, as the wind rattles the shutters, she prepares another pot of broth with herbs.
The fragrance fills the cottage again, blending with the crackle of the fire, and she feels as though they are surrounded by a circle of green, a memory of fields and gardens holding back the winter night.
The boy leans against her, drowsy but smiling. It feels like summer, he whispers. Yes, she murmurs, stroking his hair. Summer hidden in the leaves, waiting for us. The fire glows, the herbs release their magic, the cottage breathes easier. And so, though the pantry is nearly bare, though the snow piles high outside, the forgotten bundle of herbs has turned despair into hope. In the dead of January, they have tasted summer once more. Evening comes early in January, shadows stretching long before the day has truly begun. The woman prepares what will serve as their supper. The boy sits by the hearth, thin arms wrapped around his knees, watching her with quiet curiosity. He has grown used to the rhythm of these nights, scant ingredients, long simmering, patience rewarded with something warm.
Tonight she has little left, the last fragments of turnip, a few scraps of onion, a crust of black bread, and from the precious bundle of herbs, a pinch of sage and thyme.
She gathers them into the pot, adding water, stirring slowly as the mixture begins to bubble. The familiar sound of boiling comforts her. It is the sound of promise, that though meagre, a meal will come. As the steam rises, it fills the cottage with fragrance. The herbs release their sharpness, the onion its sweetness, the bread its earthy grain. Together, they become something greater than their parts. The boy inhales deeply, his eyes softening. It smells like a feast, he whispers. She smiles faintly. It is only pottage, she replies, but she knows that in their world, pottage is everything. The peasants, it is the daily dish, endlessly varied, sometimes rich with meat and beans, sometimes little more than water and scraps. Tonight it is closer to the latter, yet still, the steam curling upward feels like abundance. She stirs the pot with her wooden spoon, watching the broth thicken slightly as the bread dissolves. The steam clings to her face, warming her skin, softening the lines of weariness.
She closes her eyes for a moment, letting it surround her, letting it whisper of gardens, fields, and kitchens brighter than hers.
When the boy leans closer, she gently waves the steam toward him with her hand. He laughs softly, the first true laugh in days, as the warmth fogs his cheeks. She remembers doing the same for her daughter when she was small, bending low to let her breathe in the steam of a healing broth.
She remembers her own mother, too, teaching her that steam itself was medicine, chasing sickness from the chest, carrying the soul of the food into the body before a bite was taken.
The pottage simmers for a long while, the fire crackling beneath. Outside, the wind presses against the shutters, but inside, the cottage is filled with warmth and scent. The woman ladles the broth into 2 bowls, handing the larger to the boy. He cups it with both hands, closing his eyes as he brings it to his lips.
The steam curls around his face, and for a moment, he looks as though he is drinking the very breath of the earth itself.
He takes a sip, sighs with pleasure, and eats slowly, spoon by spoon. She watches him, her heart lightened.
For him, each mouthful is not only food but comfort, reassurance that he is cared for, that the night will not end in hunger.
She eats her own portion afterward, savoring the richness the herbs have given. The broth is thin, but each sip carries layers of flavor, each spoonful warmer than the last. She feels strength seep back into her limbs, fragile but real. As they eat, she tells the boy how pottage has always been the food of the people. How every cottage, no matter how poor, always had a pot simmering by the fire, ready to feed whoever sat at the hearth. How travelers might be given a ladle of it as hospitality, how children grew on it, how even in the richest feasts of nobles, Some form of pottage was always present. The boy listens, chewing thoughtfully. So everyone eats it? Yes, she says, smiling.
But ours is the true pottage, the kind that teaches patience. When their bowls are empty, the boy licks the last drops from his spoon, reluctant to let it end.
She gathers the bowls, setting them beside the fire to be cleaned in the morning. The steam still lingers in the room, clinging to the air like a memory of the meal. It softens the harsh lines of the cottage, makes the rough beams glow faintly in the firelight. The boy lies down again, full enough, his face content. He whispers, the steam feels like a blanket. She leans down and kisses his forehead. Then, let it cover you, she murmurs. The fire burns low, but the warmth of the meal lingers. She sits quietly, her hands folded in her lap, watching the last curls of steam fade into the air. For a moment, the hunger, the cold, the fear of tomorrow recede. In their place is peace, fragile but real, born from the simple alchemy of bread, herbs, and water. And so, though the cupboard is nearly bare, though winter still howls beyond the walls, the steam of the boiling pottage has wrapped the cottage in comfort. It has carried them through another night, whispering of survival, of love, of the promise that even scraps can become a feast when shared in hope. The long month edges toward its close. The nights are still deep, the fields still frozen, the wind still cruel, yet something in the air feels changed.
Perhaps it is only hope, fragile as the flame in the hearth, but the woman feels it stirring as she prepares the evening meal.
The shelf is nearly bare now. The butter crock has long been empty. The pouch of salt holds only a trace. The bread is gone but for crumbs. Even the bundle of herbs is thin, its twine almost showing through where leaves have been plucked away. And yet, there is still enough for tonight. Enough to give the boy one more supper before sleep. She gathers what remains, a spoonful of oats, a sliver of onion, a pinch of sage. She crumbles the bread crust into the pot, stirs it into water, adds the herbs. The mixture is thin, no thicker than the broth of yesterday, but the steam rises rich with scent, filling the room with comfort. The boy sits nearby, his eyes following her every movement. He has grown quieter this month, learning the lessons of hunger without complaint. The night, though, a small spark of excitement flickers in his gaze. Perhaps he senses that this meal, though simple, is something more. She ladles the broth into 2 bowls, handing one to him. He cups it in both hands, closes his eyes, and breathes in the steam before taking a sip. He smiles faintly. It tastes like the garden again. He whispers. She nods, sipping her own portion.
The sage lingers on her tongue, earthy and sharp, reminding her of sunlight on leaves, of bees in the fields, of days when food was plentiful.
She lets the memory fill her, easing the weight of the present. They eat slowly, savoring every spoonful.
Between bites, she tells him stories of her own childhood, of feast days when bread was plenty, of summer markets filled with fruits and cheese, of laughter echoing through fields of grain.
Her voice is gentle, steady, like a song. The boy listens, eyes wide, as though the stories themselves are food. When their bowls are empty, she does not rush to clear them. Instead, she sets them aside and sits quietly beside him. The fire burns low, the steam fading into the air, the cottage wrapped in a hush deeper than silence. For a long while, they say nothing, only listening to the crackle of the flames and the sigh of the wind outside. At last, the boy leans against her shoulder. "We have more tomorrow," he asks softly. She places her arm around him, drawing him close. "Tomorrow will bring what it brings," she replies, "and we will share it, as we always have." He nods, comforted, and closes his eyes. His breathing steadies, his body relaxes, and soon he drifts into sleep. She strokes his hair, watching the firelight flicker across his face, and feels her heart steady. The pantry is nearly bare, but it has carried them through hunger, through cold, through fever and fear. It has given just enough, never plenty, never ease, but enough. Enough for the boy to smile again, enough for her to whisper lullabies, enough for them both to see another dawn. She looks once more at the shelf, the empty crock, the salt pouch, the herb bundle tied with its frayed twine. They are symbols not of loss, but of endurance. They tell the story of survival, of how even the poorest pantry can sustain life when tended with care and love. The fire sinks lower, the shadows deepen, and the woman rests her head against the wall. Her eyes close, her breath slows. Beside her, the boy sleeps, his face peaceful. Outside, the wind still roams the frozen fields, but inside, there is warmth, there is quiet, there is enough. And so, the night passes in stillness. A grandmother and her grandson share their last supper of January, simple and humble, yet rich with the taste of survival. In the silence, in the glow, in the gentle beating of two hearts side by side, they find a feast greater than any lord's hall could offer.